Hey there, one and all boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Up and Comer Show. This is a podcast all about learning how to live a good life. We're doing that each and every week with each episode we release, and we believe that learning how to live a good life takes having intention in the tension, as our mantra says. Life is full of tensions, and we get to live within those, and the goal is to live intentionally within those. Welcome to the show. If you're new, what you'll find here are a handful of things. You'll find interviews, you'll find fellowship episodes, which are more peer-to-peer conversations, and you'll also find topical episodes where Adam and I get to chat about tensions and life and all the things in between. Today is an interview, and it was an awesome interview, one of my favorites. I know I always say that, but it's true. But before we get there, I'd just like to encourage you, if you haven't yet, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. This is by far the easiest and best way to help us out. You can just scroll down on your phone, click that 5-star button, write in a few words, and Adam and I will even read it out on air, which would be super cool to share a little bit of what you had to say. So that's an awesome way to be able to just support us as we keep pushing out this content and really trying to continue building this community and promoting more human flourishing. That's kind of our goal as a whole. The other way is to share it with a friend. When you're encouraged by an episode or you it really hits home with you, if you could just text that over to your friend, share it with those in your community, that's another great way to support and get the word out about what we are up to. If you didn't know, we are on YouTube now, so for all you YouTubers and YouTube consumers, which is a lot of us, you can go find the Up and Comer Show, all of our episodes starting at 80 and going on, and if you want to drop us a line, you can send us an email, theupandcomershow@gmail.com, and if you want to find out more about us, go to theupandcomershow.com. Today was an interview with the lovely Allison Trowbridge. So who is Allison? Allison Trowbridge is the founder and CEO of Copper Publishing House. She published her book, 22, in 2017 with HarperCollins and Thomas Nelson while completing an MBA at the University of Oxford. Allison became obsessed with publishing after witnessing a handful of books ignite the global anti-slavery movement, where she worked for nearly 10 years leading marketing, fundraising, and international campaigns at the Freedom Fund, Not for Sale, and as a partner at an impact investment fund, Just Business. She is a powerhouse, as you can tell from the bio, and I absolutely loved the time with her. You know, in some of the reference and background research I did, a lot of the common themes I heard from other people were words like magic and spark and light, describing who she is. And from the moment I walked into her home, that rang true. She really is a magical person, and she has a spark that just lights up the room. And I really experienced and witnessed that firsthand. And this conversation was a true joy. She also is a podcaster, so we got to talk a lot about questions and asking good questions and the power of questions. We talk a lot about where she got her creativity from, what her background was like. We talk a lot about learning, we talk about reading, we talk about writing, we talk about human trafficking. We really go through a whole slew of things, and it was just a fascinating story, a fascinating conversation. And I also got the chance to read her book, 22, and it's letters to a young woman finding meaning. And I have to say, I was a little bit self-conscious with my own writing after reading her. She is a beautiful writer, very, very well written, and very beautiful in her writing. So I'm not quite as beautiful. I'm a little more efficient, and so I need to work on that. But she has obviously read a lot and is a gifted writer. So that's a great book, especially if you're a young woman listening to this and want some encouragement about that season and stage of life, even as a man, I really enjoyed and benefited from it. She shares a lot of beautiful things in there. So you're going to want to listen to this whole interview because it is phenomenal, and it will really challenge you, but also inspire you. And so that's all I'll say for now. If you want the full show notes, go to theupandcomershow.com/episodes/Allie, ALLIE, and we'll put all the links in there. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Allison Trowbridge. Allison Trowbridge, welcome to the Up and Comers Show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be on the other side of the mic. This is fun.
I know. We were talking about that before air, and it's nice to be fielding or receiving, because sometimes when you're giving, at least on the podcast end, there's so many technical details to tend to that
Totally.
It can be quite stressful.
Totally. And just thinking about questions. And I love doing interviews on podcasts, but it's actually kind of fun and relaxing to get to be the one asked questions. This is
yes.
Yeah, it's a fun
best.
change. I like it. Can't get used to this.
Well, before we get to questions, I do want to say this green tea is phenomenal. Do you want to give a shout out to people about this green tea magic that I'm sipping on here?
Yeah, it's this like Tea Republic green tea that they do, and it's cinnamon, and I don't know. I think there's quite literally some sort of magic in it.
Yeah. No, that cinnamon is with green tea. I've never had
Right?
it, but it's so nice together.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
So, do you go by Allie or Allison?
I go by both. I also respond to "Hey you" or "That girl there" or "Al," anything.
What has been the most bizarre nickname you've gotten?
Oh gosh. Let's see. My one of my best friends, Jeannie, her mom calls me Alibaba.
Wow.
Yeah, and she only calls me Alibaba. So I don't think she knows what my real name is, but just her name is Mama Mai. She's like kind of become this personality. And I am Alibaba. I love it. So feel free to call me Alibaba. That works as well.
I don't know if I should steal that. It seems pretty. Pretty intimate there. Yeah. But there's something about nicknames. They're really endearing. You know, like that's why I love trying to give nicknames to people sooner rather than later, because you just have a closer bond from it, which is really weird. But
it was a funny thing when I was born. My dad wanted to give me a name that couldn't be nicknamed, which I don't know why he thought Allison couldn't be nicknamed, but there you go. And so when I was 5 years old, I loved the concept of nicknames. And I remember driving in the back seat of the car asking my mom what a nickname was for Allison. And she thinks about it and says, well, I guess Allie. And I'm like, okay, good to know. Next day in kindergarten, the teacher goes around taking roll call and calls out Allison. And it's like silent. And she's like, Allison. And it's silent. She looks at me and goes, Allison. And I'm like, my name is Allie now. And so she goes, Allie. I'm like, present.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it was a self-ordained nickname when I was very, very young. But I agree. I love nicknames. I'll nickname anything. Anyone.
Was that out of rebellion and spite, or was that just out of curiosity in
I don't
kindergarten?
know. I loved the concept of nicknames. What are some that people call you?
I've had quite a few. My dad always called me T-Man. I actually had that on my wall above my bed.
Cute. I like that. I like T-Man.
It was a good one. Yeah. It was fun. It's like how I know my dad. You know, it's like he always calls me. Now I get T a lot. In high school, I self-nicknamed myself Ya Boy, YB. He was a famous rapper out of the Bay Area. I was pretty big into rap music. And so, we can go both ways. You can give it to others, you can give it to yourself.
Totally.
And some we're more proud of than others. But they are great. I guess one of the things that we were talking about before that I would love to hear from you on is questions, because one of the things I heard a lot about from some mutual friends was how good you are at asking intentional, meaningful questions, and how you really create space for that with relationships in your life. And even like we talked about beforehand with podcasts, is such an amazing arena for asking questions. Yeah. So I'd love to hear how you think about
the use of questions or what the power of questions is for you?
Yeah. I think a really well-formed question is actually a gift to somebody, because if it's very thoughtful, you can actually allow somebody to have their own aha moments, which is why counseling and coaching is so powerful. I love being able to ask people things and kind of draw up the gems within them and allow them to even learn or discover something about themselves. And also, I'm just insatiably curious, and I love getting my head around who people are and what their stories are and where they come from and how they think about things. And another part of it is just selfish, because I feel like I already know what's in my head. And so that to me is so boring, because I know my own story. I don't understand people who love to talk about themselves, because I feel I'm like, there's nothing interesting about that. I love, getting to know people and dive deeper.
What are your right now, currently, what are your go-to questions? What are the ones that you love asking the most right now?
You know what? My friend Lane Wood gave me a great one once. He said he loves asking people, what are you excited about? And so I've kind of stolen that one from him, especially if I'm ever doing an interview with someone and I don't know where to go next. It's the best, because it opens them up to think about what they're passionate about and what they're looking ahead towards. And then usually there's a lot more you could ask from that. But I think just in general, things that are really open-ended. And I love asking people what they're reading, what books they're reading.
So good. Yeah, you can learn a lot from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool because I think too, it, like you said, it opens up our perception to their reality at the end of the day, right? Because we're always perceiving things and assuming things about the people that are on the other side of our eyes that we're looking at or talking with. And a question helps us maintain that open mind and also get a clear understanding, like a more objective understanding. And it's so hard. It's so hard to push for that always. I think that's why developing a habit of question asking and question forward really is just a great self-practice, because it helps us be more open-minded, you know?
Yeah, well, and we learn to listen. I think a lot of people, I think it's literally over my bed in my room, it says listen, because it's a constant reminder to me to hear people. And I just love learning. I love learning. And I think people have so much to teach us, and we stay at the surface.
For you, and this is a big one because, man, I think we all suck at this, but listening, how do you, I guess, rate yourself or rank, how do you evaluate yourself is a better way to say it on your listening in day-to-day life? What's your self-checks or your self-talks or reminders that you use to be active in listening or being present in the moment to listen or to hear someone?
If I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next, then I'm not doing a good job listening. I think the temptation is to ask a question and then already be forming where you're going next, instead of actively hearing, receiving, even taking a moment to pause, internalize. We jump in and cut each other off, and we're thinking about kind of our own, the thing that we want to get out and communicate. And there's no growth in that.
Yes, there really isn't. Yeah, and there's a tension there. There's a tension there too, because you also want to synthesize what they're saying with what you already know.
Yeah.
And you also want to connect it to what you already know about them.
Yeah.
And you also want to connect it to the flow of the discussion. So there are layers to it. They're it's weird.
But I know that is a good point. You do, and when you're podcasting, you do need to be thinking a little bit about what question you're going to ask next.
This is a different environment.
I know, it's a little different.
But it is fascinating. Do you have what has been the most interesting question you've ever been asked or have you ever heard? Is there any that come to mind?
Yeah, my friend Peter Smith, who founded a company called Blockchain, he asks every person that he's hiring what their convictions are. And I think that's such a beautiful question. And it tells you a lot about a person. I think it's such a neat thing to bring into an interview for a job hire too, because it really shows you what's at the core of somebody.
It's very true. Yeah, I love that. One of the ones that I read recently on a newsletter, and I used actually with this young adults group I lead for an icebreaker question, but this one's fascinating. Like, it was actually, it was interesting because on its surface, and I'll say the question before I say this, I guess. So the question is, if you could safely eat any inedible object, what would it be?
Ooh.
And what's so cool about that, I'll give you a second to think about because you're going to have to answer.
Nice.
But the cool thing about this question is that it on its surface, it feels like it wouldn't tell you much about the other person. But when they answer and they describe what it was, it tells you about like where their mind goes when it gets creative. It tells you about things that they're interested in or things that they like already and how they compare it to other things in life. So it's really, it's usually the more innocent questions, the ones that don't seem like you learn that much about people are usually the ones we learn the most. Just like fiction is usually what we learn the most about life, not necessarily nonfiction.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating. But if there was an edible object that you could eat, what would it be?
I think it'd be fun to eat clouds.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That'd be
Just
so
like
cool.
put your hand out and like grab some cloud and like, or eat a rainbow.
Oh, yeah. Did you see the rainbow the other week, a couple weeks ago?
No.
Oh, man, there was one out here that was it's one of the brightest ones I've ever seen in my life. Okay, so insatiably curious. Where did this curiosity come from? What were the origins of that?
I think if you love learning, then you are curious by default. And I think that's something my parents really instilled in me at a really young age, and just this kind of baked in creativity that I think was at the core of how my parents raised us to be always learning and reading and creating things. And I think that combination makes you curious about the world and wanting to grow and discover. And I think books open up a lot of that too, because it's Stephen King calls books a portable kind of magic. And it's, I think when you're a kid that's reading, your world just opens up and becomes, a life that's really, when you're young is really quite small. It suddenly becomes global and otherworldly. And I think curiosity becomes kind of innate to all of that.
Totally. Was there any specific examples or illustrations from childhood of things that your parents did to encourage that, or maybe activities that they had you guys do, or what would be some specific examples of that?
Yeah, one thing I loved was that we went to the library every week and we checked out 40 books because that was the limit. And if we finished all of them, we would go again and check out another 40. So we would
40
read
per week.
So usually 80 if we went twice. Yeah. Bobby was the librarian. She was my brother and my favorite person. But yeah, so it was we read all the time. I think I won like $500 in third grade for a summer reading award because I read so many books, which I didn't know was not a normal thing. I'm like, oh, cool,
amazing.
Right? I know. I didn't even know I was competing. So that was one. And then art was really a big part of childhood. So we weren't allowed to watch a movie during the day if we weren't drawing while we watched it, which is so my mom's an art teacher. So my brother and I were always sketching and drawing. And I think that just made our brains inherently creative. I actually used to write books when I was little too. My mom would take construction paper and staple it into a book and then draw a big square on each page. I would draw pictures in it and then sit there and dictate. This was before I could write, so I was like 4. And I would dictate to my mom and, and now the dog jumped into the river, and she'd like write it. And so I have these little books that I wrote when I was like 4 and 5 years old.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. That is amazing. What was the, I guess, well, first would be, who is a better artist, you or your brother?
Oh, me by far. Me by far. Me by far. That's one thing I can definitely claim. He would say the same.
What form of art is the thing that still gives you the most joy or life now?
Yeah, I love painting. I love painting. I actually just made a date with a friend to do a painting day in a few weeks. And it kind of taps my brain into a different place.
Yeah, no, my sister has been really diving in much more to her path as an artist. And so it's been fun to, and it really has, I mean, I've always enjoyed it when it happens. It's very rare. But there is just so much freedom and beauty in that. I think that's just amazing. What books from your childhood were the ones that that you look back on as having some of the most formidable impact on you?
The first one that comes to mind is Goodnight Moon, which I don't know how that would have had a big impact on me, but I loved that book. Gosh, what's a more intelligent book than Goodnight Moon? I would make my parents go around the room at night and say goodnight to everything in my room, which shows you who had the power in that relationship. It's like a 30-minute bedtime routine. I was really good at delaying it.
Oh man.
Gosh, I mean, I loved the Narnia books. I loved. So you wouldn't have known like Babysitter's Club or any of those, but there were so many of these good like classic chapter books that were just so fun, and it again just takes you into. I think one thing that I've always pursued in my life is wonder. And I think reading really links us into and keeps us in a state of wonder and curiosity. And it allows you to enter someone else's story and really experience their world, their emotions, their tragedies, their hopes. And so if you can do that at a young age, it just, the creativity that it draws into your life is, I'm not a parent, but I hope that I can give that to my kids someday.
Yeah. What would be some other, reading has got to be, if not, I think reading has to be up there in the top echelon of things that create wonder and curiosity. But what other things have you found to really help you in pursuing wonder and creating that curiosity for you?
I think it's just exposing yourself to creation, I think, is one.
Yeah.
Being in nature and being near things that inspire awe, like ocean, mountains, just under the sky, like getting into places out of cities where you see a clear sky at night. And I think that plays a big role. Another big one for me is people. I surround myself with people that I'm constantly learning from, who spark and inspire ideas, creativity, who I want to be more like, and emulate elements of their lives. The people that we surround ourselves with are really everything. Yes.
No, I think you just hit. Yeah, I echo all of that in full unison. Because one of the things that people often said about you in doing some research, they talked about how one person said that you're a people collector.
Oh no!
In a good way.
Sounds like all the people are very small.
Oh, no.
Yes, I have lines and lines of people in the.
I thought it was
closet.
just a funny verbiage there, but
I worked in anti-trafficking. I promise I don't collect real people.
That's so funny. Yeah. So you obviously are very. I think one thing that most people that know you would agree with is that you're very good with gathering people and bringing intentionality to that time, but also surrounding yourself with great people. What has been, I guess, who are your, at an early age, who are your mentors when you were younger in life, or who was your first mentor, someone that really came alongside you in the journey of life?
Gosh, I mean, my earliest one was my kindergarten teacher. It truly was. Her name was Mrs. Som. it's funny when you're 5 years old and somebody really believes in you and really invests in you and believes that you're special and have something to offer the world. I think as a kid, you live into that, and we live into the words that people speak over our lives. And I think that's true as an adult as well. And so if you have mentors and friends and people coming alongside you that are speaking big things over you and believing those things for you, you naturally live into that.
Totally. In current life, like I think the community, I think a lot of people are always wanting to know, right? Like how do you create that community that you want, or how do you have those people in your life that you really need? And obviously networking is like one of those things that, especially here in LA, is like
womp womp.
Oh my goodness! like
I know I don't love that word.
I hate it. Right?
I don't love that word.
But that was one thing that another friend had asked, was how you network in an authentic way, or how do you think about finding community in this stage of life?
Yeah. It's funny. I never ever think about networking, and I actually wouldn't go to a quote unquote networking event because I'm so about friendship, community, and tribe. It's for me, it's about being in places where I'm surrounded by like-hearted people. People, they don't have to agree with me or think like me, but there's a heart towards making an impact and doing some measure of good in the world and creating some greater change, and the sense of coming alongside each other. And I am really drawn to people that there's both a depth of friendship, but it's also really oriented towards the outside world and doing something in the world. And so it isn't just let's be friends for our own benefit and our own enjoyment, but rather, let's build into one another's lives so that we can go out and do more for the world. And maybe that sounds too aspirational, but it really is baked into all of my friendships, is this sense of how do we build into one another and support one another and do great things together. And so so that's why I don't really think about networking so much as friendships and long-term relationships. And then I just think it's so important to kind of identify what your tribe is and where they gather, and being a part of those things. Like, I don't typically love conferences, but I love going to events and gatherings and conferences where that tribe of people shows up. That I spent most of my 20s working on social justice issues. And so finding people who are aligned towards that. And I mean, those have become decade-long friendships and people who are still in my life and I still invest in. And there's a sense of like running alongside each other.
Yeah, totally. And we need that, right? Like that's how we're wired. It's how we're created, as relational beings. I mean, but still there's some tension there, right? Because it's I think we all are somewhere on the spectrum. There's a spectrum of even introverted to extroverted is a lot of ways we describe it, but needing time by ourselves, needing time with God, needing time with others, needing time with our work, needing time for rest. So there's always like seasons and ebbs and flows. But
absolutely.
Where are you kind of on that spectrum or scale of people time versus like me time or individual time versus relational time?
I am a genuine ambivert. So I call myself I always thought of myself as an extrovert, and a mentor last year really drilled into me. He's like on the Myers-Briggs. He's like, you are actually an introvert that's trained yourself to be very extroverted. But if you don't identify how much you need time to be alone and think and synthesize and process and then go out into the world, you are going to spin out and burn out. And it was very, very insightful because I love being around people. And if you leave me by myself too long, I go bonkers. But if I don't have time away. Even at a big event, I need to like step away and get kind of a quiet moment to just like recalibrate and rev up again. So it's just how it's kind of been learning and understanding myself and how badly I need both. I love having people around. My roommate of mine, we joke about having alone time together, where we love having people in the house, but being able to like go into a different room and be alone and that being okay. And so having this like, I feel like that kind of gives a visual to what I need. I love having community and people and investing in people and being around people all the time. But if I don't get those moments away and quiet time to think, rest, process, dream, get vision, like I'm very vision oriented and I need to get quiet to do that.
Yes. Oh, it's so huge. And it's really interesting you bring up that point because it's making my mind really go on getting to a threshold in a relationship where you can be together but be alone is a form of mastery.
Everything. Oh,
it's awesome,
best.
right? Like when
when
you're comfortable with someone enough that you can both be quiet together.
Family. Yeah.
That's a special relationship.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just it's not every person, right?
No.
It's a really cool gift.
Yeah. My closest friends, we do not have to fill the space and we can just be. Like some of our best days are, in like pajamas half the day, no makeup, like just being and catching up on work and, and just doing life together, not having to be on. Because I think so much of, even when you're working, there's a sense of being on and bringing your best self, which is so wonderful. And there's a time and place for, but you've reached a depth of friendship when you can be completely off.
Yes. It's so refreshing. Especially in LA, which we'll get to in a second, but what have you found as the rhythms for that? Like, what are the things that you found that you need to prioritize to help you in that?
Yeah. A big one recently is sleep. Shocker. I know, like, hey, news alert world, we actually do need sleep to be healthy humans. I spent a lot of years running on no sleep, and that was not wise. So if I don't get 7 hours, I have to find a time to catch up. And so I'm just trying to do better at prioritizing that and taking care of myself in that way so that I can bring my best mental, emotional energy to whatever I do. Another big one for me has been Sabbath. I have to have a day out of the week where I turn my brain off. And really the big thing is that I'm not oriented towards work, oriented towards email or doing or producing. There was a stage I went through in my mid-20s where I was co-writing a book for a pastor of mine. And it was about a year in my life where I would work. I think I intensified my normal work schedule just to prove to them that me doing the book wasn't going to detract. So I'd be like working 10 hours, 10-hour days, right? And then get home, eat something, and then like work on writing from like 8 p.m. to like 1 or 2 a.m. And then weekends, I would get home from work on Friday night and just work straight through the weekend and not leave the house until like Sunday night, go to the grocery store. And I was I still physically feel how burnt out I was at the end of that season. And I have these flashbacks to being like crumpled on the bathroom floor, like weeping. And so it all feels so dramatic, but it was, and I had all these events I was producing and just like being so tired I could barely like lift a spoon to my mouth to like feed myself. And just, it doesn't have to be like that. And it was funny, I submitted the book and then went like the next weekend, went to church and my friend Dave Lomas was preaching and he talked about Sabbath. And I'd always heard about Sabbath, but I never took it seriously. And he just like laid it home about how without taking time to stop and rest and just be, we begin to believe that our whole contribution or that our worth is based on our contribution. and that it's all based on our doing instead of creating space for authentic faith to really take the lead and saying, God, I trust you to move the needle on things and make things happen and open doors. And it's not all in my sheer exertion, but rather, the end goal is not how much I produce, but it's a faith is a relationship, and it's a being, and it's a state of existing in communion with God. And anyway, it was like one of the deepest convictions I've ever felt of just like, wow, here I was resenting God and my faith, being like, how, here I am doing this noble, holy work, and I'm killing myself in the process. And we become these martyrs, and we don't have to.
Yes.
We don't have to. And the great irony is I realized I could spend 2 hours staring at a blank page feeling like I was working, and I was so burnt out, versus if I'm rested and healthy, I can bang out a paragraph in like 5 minutes.
Totally. It's so, man, this is such an important point. Like, this needs to be heard over and over again because it's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But I would argue that and this is something that came up in an interview that I was on a different guy's podcast on, and he brought the point that it's actually not necessarily counterintuitive, it's countercultural. And that's because we're getting our intuitions a lot of times from culture, which naturally happens. It's the power of culture.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily good or bad, but we have to recognize what is good and bad in that culture and in that intuition we're getting.
Yeah.
And this pressure we feel to keep going and do more and be defined by what we do instead of who we are not, they're half-truths, which make them even harder to recognize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sleep. There's so many great resources. Matthew Walker's podcast on Joe Rogan was great. It's like 2 hours of just pure sleep information, but it really should be a non-negotiable for anyone listening.
Yeah.
And we have to preach this to ourselves a lot.
Yeah.
But I think the Sabbath one is the one that I've been super convicted of a ton recently too, because when you're not in a traditional 9-to-5 job, and even when you are nowadays, it can be hard for any of us to really set aside a day. Set aside, and Sundays for me, I serve at the church, there's this coffee cart, so Sundays are not Sabbath for me.
Yeah.
And
right.
So I had to find, today was supposed to, I told you, today was supposed to be it for me, and I didn't do a great job today. And I was really convicted by that, seriously. And but there's a great sermon by Tim Keller that I'll send you after this. I'll put in the show notes too, called Work and Rest. And in it is the most beautiful breakdown of it I've ever seen. And part of the thing he highlighted in there was this inner murmur of the soul, which is the voice of self-reproach. And that's the thing that is amplified when we don't take a day aside, right? Which, just like you said, it's saying, I am not good enough unless I do X, or I'm not enough until I do this.
Yeah.
And that self-reproach is a voice that is fueled by not taking a Sabbath.
Yeah.
And it's a self-dependence, not a God dependence. And there's so many layers to this. But last week when I took the Sabbath, it was like a Wednesday. It was just the most refreshing thing, experientially, you can't even define it. It's just thank you. This was a blessing,
Yeah. Yeah. And you were asking me about, finding creative inspiration, and you get so many inputs when you take space to dream and think and imagine and go to an art museum or go for a walk or just listen to a podcast, watch a great film, to allow yourself to be exposed to great ideas, art, people, conversations, relationships. Those things fill you up and are the seeds of inspiration for the great work that you will do. And if you don't create space for those, you're really diminishing your ability to ironically produce at the highest level. And I'm a Enneagram 3. So
you are.
Yes,
okay, I was going to ask you. I was wondering.
Yeah.
Well, cheers to us.
Are you a 3? Oh, I know when I see one. I thought so. We have the same issues.
Oh.
Yeah, but it's so I think as a 3, which is the achiever for anyone who doesn't know the Enneagram typing system, but it's the great temptation of the 3 is to link who you are with what you do. And we get into these cycles of just achieving for the pure sake of achieving and getting runs on the board, and we don't even know why we're doing it anymore. And and that actually kind of links back. It really links back to mentors for me. Is even as I finished grad school a little over a year ago, I had a few mentors, one specifically who sat me down and explicitly told me to just stop and take a break and actually take a full-on sabbatical for a couple months. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was like, it seemed the most absurd, countercultural. Like, imagine finishing an MBA and you have 350 type A students asking you what you're going to do next. And you say, I'm going to rest. I'm going to take a break, and everyone else has these high powered jobs. Hard, really, really, really difficult, but the most game changing thing. And it was not easy. It was hard financially. It was hard emotionally. It was hard for a lot of reasons, but it allowed me space to, I was at that point, I was at a level of tired that I had been at and burnout I'd been at for, I feel like, a few years that I didn't even know how to identify because I'd gotten so used to it.
Yeah. And
taking space to ground myself and just get true rest and health and step away from what I was doing. I finally got to a place of I could, if somebody gave me a livable salary and told me I could not ever work or produce another day in my life. So maybe some people that sounds great, but as a 3, you're like, that's your worst nightmare. Yeah. But I actually would feel okay with it, where I'm like, I just so am grateful for getting to live and do community. And I feel loved in who I am as I am, not in what I'm producing. And man, that was a journey to get there. Because up until that point, you almost you can't even see it anymore. You just keep doing.
And I think that's such an important thing to highlight, because it's not that we take this quantum leap into self-destruction. It's these baby steps that add up into this really wretched hole that we find ourselves in of like, and we think that that's normal. I mean, when I was playing golf, as an athlete, like, your career was based on your performance. And so I started seeing direct correlation in real time between the amount of sleep and recovery I had and the performance I could produce on the course, not only from a physical, but also from a mental standpoint, and the focus and the concentration.
Yeah.
And it became so evident to me that it was such a non-negotiable. And if I wasn't getting adequate recovery, it didn't matter how much my output was. It was going to be limiting.
Right.
And so that lesson to me is priceless. It's worth its weight in gold, because now I can say with conviction, like, no, I am going to be sleeping regardless of what my head is telling me about being lazy or whatever this is, right? There's just culture saying, you need to work more than you sleep, and you're being all that stuff. That's not the right voice to listen to. I can preach that truth and believe it because of that experience. But when you've been taking these baby steps into this hole, you don't understand that there's something outside of that hole, right? And that's such a hard thing to be able to convince people, no, it is worth it to prioritize it and to dig your way out of that hole and to get to where the new normal is actually a level of optimization that you haven't felt in maybe your whole life.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know. And now I feel like I've got this little side ministry of, like, I know burnout when I see it.
Yeah.
And I just sat down with a friend 2 weeks ago and we talked about her burnout, and you see it simmers just under the surface, and there's so much emotion wrapped into it. And sometimes all you need is someone else to give you permission to stop.
That is some really good words. Very true. What is, I guess, so I have 2 questions. One is on the sabbatical. What do you see as that, like, the frequency, or how would you think about that for the future for you, or how you apply that in your rhythms throughout your life ahead of you? And where are you kind of on the spectrum of healthy to unhealthy and rest right now?
I love it. Right now I would say take 3 months of truly stopping every 7 years.
I love it.
Yeah. Which you kind of see those, I feel like we get into those rhythms, and you just need times where and it was funny because when that mentor told me I needed to just stop. I said, okay, well, can I sign another book deal and write a book on my sabbatical? And he's like, no, like, no. I'm like, how can I use this time and space
that's exactly what I would
for
ask.
something, so I have to be creating something. And it's hard to just teach yourself how to be in yourself and be okay with yourself. It's beautiful and critical. So I would say a big one like that about every 7 years.
Yeah.
And then something that I want to start doing and getting better at is maybe just once a quarter taking like a weekend away where I give myself like a little mini retreat to turn off and get into a just creative headspace to just dream and be and rest and read. And I think even those little breaks are really, really key and important.
Huge. Yeah. I know. It's like we don't need to save it all up for the once every 7 years. Like let's also incorporate it, now and in our daily life or in our weekly or monthly life. It doesn't have to be segregated into these boxes, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also accepting limitations, which is difficult, but I'm in a season work-wise of just, I feel like I'm in a full-on sprint, but I've also prioritized just getting sleep every night, getting regular workouts in, getting a day off to Sabbath and time with community, and still prioritizing community and not letting work take over any of those areas. And because of that, I feel like my focused brain time is the output's higher than it's ever been. And so that's fun to see your own ability grow. It's like a muscle you've worked out a lot.
Yes. Oh, and that's one of the most encouraging things in life is growth, right? Like seeing tangible progress. Yeah. I don't know of anything that's more hopeful or helpful in life, because it is that hope of growth. Yeah. And that's fuel for us. There's a great quote I heard. I've said it a lot, but it's so good. It's forward progress is not a finished process. And it's like, man, praise God for that, that he's never done with us and that we're never done in life,
Yeah, so that was the moral, so you don't have to read it. That was the moral story of my book, actually, is the journey is the destination. Which I want to touch on this. So I want to hear more on that, because I was reading a lot about that, but go on. Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, when I was in college, my favorite devotional is Oswald Chambers' book, My Utmost for His Highest. If they canonize that, I'd probably be okay with it. It's like so good. But there's a devotional where he says, it's in July 20-something. He talks about how what we see as the journey, God sees as the end result. And in my early 20s, it really struck me, because I realized that my whole life I'd always felt like God was waiting for me to get somewhere, that I was going to wake up one day at like 35 and have arrived, and I would have figured out who I am and had my life totally sorted, and that I would be this kind of finished product and not really sail into the sunset, but kind of like, okay, now I've got my life and now I just kind of go. And I'm not 35 yet, but anyone I talk to who is agrees that that's just a complete myth. But I think culture can make us feel like we're supposed to get somewhere, and we're supposed to hit a point in which we kind of pass this imaginary finish line. And I think one of the greatest gifts is if you realize that the process is the end result. And I imagined for the first time, God is outside of time, seeing my life all at once, not as kind of being with me in this linear line, but and it's just the most freeing thing when you realize God's not waiting for you to get somewhere or do something for Him, or you don't ever arrive, and it's this more of a state of being and being in process. It's a life-changing discovery.
It really is. And I think we never stop learning it, right? Like or never at least stop preaching it to ourselves as well. Yeah. Because again, it's not necessarily a natural default response. It's an intentional chosen response.
Yeah. And I think I have to catch myself in it all the time, because I think when you are driving really hard towards goals and certain things, I have to check myself and just remind myself just to be and to be present and grateful for a season of churn and uncertainty and growth and goals and dreams and sprinting and just all of the hard work. It's very easy to get in the mindset of, well, once I pass this point, then I'll be happy, then it'll be okay. And I think we have a tendency to build our lives around that of, okay, well, once I graduate, once I get the job, once I meet my person, once I get married, once I have kids, once I have grandkids, once I retire, and then suddenly you're like, once I die, what was the, we kind of set life up in these goalposts that are not a thing.
It's so true. So 22 Letters to a Young Woman Searching for Meaning. That was your book. It is your book. Not was. It is.
Still is. Last I checked.
Yeah, it's great. It just doesn't go away.
Yeah, I know. The nice thing about a book.
Yes. Talk to me about what did you learn from the process of that book? Because it is about the process of life, but what did you learn from the process of that book?
Of writing it?
Yes.
Ooh, gosh, I would say I could easily say it's the hardest thing I've ever done was writing that book. It was very emotionally challenging. It takes so much grit. I think I in some ways you learn that you're stronger than you think you are. And it really is a marathon to finish something like that, but also it's something that I felt such a strong conviction had to exist in the world. It was, in some ways, it wasn't that I didn't care, but I wasn't really worried about the outcome of it. As far as I think the reason why most people write books will be for kind of a platform reason or a professional reason. Like, I need to write this book to establish my, career as, a consultant in this area, and this book will let me to do that. And this book for me was like, I will feel like Jonah running from God, not to be dramatic about it, but I felt like it was such a strong conviction. And it really came from when I was graduating college, when I was about 20, when I was 22, I pulled an all-nighter with one of my closest girlfriends and just, was just kind of like griping if only there was a book that spoke to the season of life. Because I feel like there's never been a better moment in history to be a young person in your early 20s. But there's also never been a more challenging time where you feel these pressures, specifically young women, but I really think all young people, to do it all, be it all, have your life figured out, solve global poverty by the time you're 30, like all of these things that I think feel just debilitating, and you lose the ability to just be present and enjoy the process. So I made a commitment back then that whatever I did career-wise, I was going to write that book someday, because I so badly felt that I needed it and needed that guidance. And so for me, it was like a piece of my life mission that was so rewarding just to see it brought to life. But honestly, I had night terrors before it came out. It was very, very scary.
Yeah. So. Well, I want to dive into a little bit of that. First would be from that initial seed, how long, what was the amount of time before you started creating that book or moving forward with that process?
Yeah. So it always sat with me from when I was 22 that I wanted to do it. Back then I was like, I'm going to write it now. And I'm so glad that I got busy with work and that there's not a book that exists that I wrote when I was 22. I was not in a place where I should have been writing a book back then. But gosh, it was, so fast forward, I would say 5 years, I had been thinking a lot about the idea of mentorship and the role of mentors in my life and younger people I was mentoring, and really sitting with that. And I was on a business trip in London and was extremely jet lagged and sat up in bed at 6 a.m. And it was like a download into my head of I just saw the book, and it was a series of letters that I write to a character, and I felt like I joke about it, but I joke it was like C.S. Lewis meets Little Women, kind of a no demons, but it like a screw tape letters type of format, and and so from that point, that was when I felt like I actually saw it and saw the vision for it. And from that point on, it was like, okay, I need to start making a plan to leave my job and to start moving forward with doing a book proposal. And I never had any doubt about it, like that it was going to get done, because I felt such a strong conviction that it was almost like if I don't write it, someone else is going to write it. This book just needs to exist in the world. And so kind of began the process from there.
And what was the timeline when you started to finish? How long, and what was that? What was the lowest point of that journey?
So funny enough, so writing the proposal took a bit of time, and talking to agents probably took 9 months or so, and then I signed with my agent, wrote a sample chapter, shopped it around, so that was another 6 months, and then once I had the contract, I don't know what I was thinking, but I only gave myself 6 months to actually write the book, because I got the contract with only a sample chapter and the outline. And then the bulk of it, you kind of have a month or two where you're like, I have to write a book. And for whatever reason, that takes like 2 months to sink in. And then you're like, I've got 4 months to write a book. So truth be told, the bulk of the book I wrote in 3 months.
Yeah.
In a full on, I hate my life, intense, somewhat depressed sprint. Yes. Which probably involved poor planning on my part, but it just was also just kind of how life worked out at that time. And then from there, it was working with my editor, and we'd go back and forth. But when she would hand it back to me, she would hand it back with light edits and maybe fix this paragraph and stuff like that. And then I would come back and rewrite whole entire sections, add new chapters, move huge pieces around. So then I was like doing these intense deep dives and rewrites. She's like, you didn't have to rewrite all that and rewrite. I'm like, it's not good enough. So that was another intense. So I would say a year all in of actually writing and editing before it was shipped off, and then goes into copy edits.
Yeah. What was the lowest point of the whole book process for you?
The lowest point was some very beloved friends of mine gave me their home in Long Island to write from, because I was living in New York at the time. New York is the worst place to write a book from, the city, because you try and carve out a day, and then 3 people text you that they're in town for the weekend or something. Of course. There's always an event, or there's always something, and I was just not doing well staying focused there. So left, forced isolation. It was dead of winter, so it was snowing. I was all alone at this house in the cold in the winter. I had just gone through a really bad breakup, and I came down with some form of, I don't know if it was pneumonia, or it was a level of like sickness where I think at one point I actually like laid on the kitchen counter for about an hour because I couldn't move. And I tried to call a doctor to get medicine, but I had no voice. So I couldn't actually speak to ask a doctor for, it was not good. And I lost a couple days of writing off of that. So that, I would say that would be the low point. Yeah.
They make great stories. They really do. Looking back on it, I mean,
but I do think there's an element of I think our bodies respond to stress, and if we're not managing it well, they actually wage a strike against us, so that we're forced to just stop. And I think I was carrying so much emotional, mental, physical stress that my body just shut off on me.
Totally. I think that's one thing that's really interesting there too, is that it's not just physical stress, or it's not just emotional, but it's physical, emotional, and mental, all three. Oh my
gosh. Mental is huge.
Yeah. And everyone experiences different forms of that, but when you combine all three, like they all play a factor, and it's just system overload. And stress is ultimately, a fear response, and it's affecting the nervous system. And that's a temporary state, not a prolonged state that our body can be in. So it's amazing how our bodies are designed, but we don't listen very well.
I know. And it's like the formula to stay healthy and balanced is so simple. And yet when you have something looming, it feels impossible.
Yep, it does. What has been, what are you most grateful for in the book?
I get letters written. I get messages, I would say, a couple times a week, and I get handwritten letters sometimes from girls who've read the book, and just them sharing the impact that it made on them is like, it's unreal. That is like truly, it's 100% why I wrote it. It really, like the fact that it would do that for one person, but that it would do that for many. And it's not like that was like some crazy bestseller or anything like that, but the depth of impact it had on a number of young women's lives is like that. Yeah, that was my why.
Carl Rogers said that which is most personal is most universal.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? If we write from a place of the most personal for us, of what like is that itch that you just can't help but scratch, that's the thing that's actually going to reach the most people because it's the most universal. It's the experience that we all relate to. Yeah. And usually we get those flipped around, you know, which is sad, but it's cool to hear that, that testimony of it. Yeah. How would you encourage young or first-time authors or writers? Like, what would be the encouragement you would give them, or the piece of advice you'd give to anyone starting or embarking or in the middle of that journey? Yeah.
First of all, I would say I think we really get caught up on the idea of writing just for publishing or getting published, and thinking that it's not valid or worthwhile if it doesn't get that sort of endorsement. And I just think that's a huge mistake. For one, I think if you get into a regular rhythm of writing, it's one of like the most beneficial practices. Actually, a good friend of mine, Allie Fallon, has a site called Find Your Voice, and it's all about building in daily practices of writing in your life. And she's taught me a lot about just the health benefits of it and mental health. And there's all these great stats about people's salaries go up X amount and like all these great. So I think just the writing in and of itself, your ability to know yourself and process your story and be able to understand what's going on in your world is one of the most invaluable things. And the ability to share ideas and document. And there's so many ways and places to share ideas beyond just a book, whether it's writing on Medium or blogging or just writing something for your own friends and family. I think there's so much value in that. And it's the sort of thing where once I got into the rhythm of writing, it actually, the neatest part, I would say, of being in the kind of rush to the finish line of writing the book and having a deadline is that once I was so attuned to writing all the time, you start actually getting ideas and inspiration everywhere. And I would say probably anything that anyone has ever underlined was something that came to me like half asleep in bed at night or on the subway or like walking down the street or talking to a friend, where I just would dictate it into Evernote and save it. And I would just have all of these one-liners and then I would write so around them. Yeah. But so I think it's like attuning yourself to inspiration. And right now I'm not doing a ton of writing in the moment. And I actually want to get back into a rhythm of frequent, if not daily writing. But when I'm not in a rhythm of writing all the time, I don't get those flashes of inspiration in the same way. And to think of like what I'm missing out on from not regularly writing is, So anyway, I just think to a young writer, I think the best thing is just to start and to start doing it and to see it as a way to serve. And if you see it as a way to serve people and to both write for yourself and to know yourself, and then write as a way to bless and serve other people and share ideas, there's always going to be avenues that open up for that down the road, whether it's a publishing deal someday or just simply sharing something with someone in the smallest way, but the way that you said it gave them an aha moment.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's so true. I definitely find that out. When I was in the mode too, it was very much you're in a mind or a mode of thinking that just produces these amazing breakthroughs, like you're talking about, which is kind of like, it was interesting. It reminded me of a quote I actually heard today. He said, Graham Duncan said that people are like musical instruments, and the range of notes they can play is dependent on the range of tensions that they've learned to hold, which is speaking more to life, but it's also true in writing, in the sense that it's an open loop, right? You haven't closed the loop, and so since it's still open, you're holding this tension of an open loop, and throughout everyday life, the subconscious is working on it.
Yeah.
And it brings together these amazing connections.
Which I love that you talk about tension, because that's one of my favorite topics is I actually will credit Andy Stanley on this one. I heard him speak on it at Catalyst like a decade ago, and it just always stuck with me. But he talks about how tension is something that we in our daily lives and in business and work, we're always trying to run from tension and alleviate tension and get rid of tension. And the tension is good and needed and important. And we need, the tension in our company of, do we spend money on hiring new people or on marketing the product, or just anywhere in life, everywhere you look, there are tensions. Like he used the example of a church. Do we build a new building, or do we pour money into ministries and outreach? And it's everywhere you look, there's tension. And if you're constantly trying to alleviate it, you miss the benefit and the kind of brilliance that comes from that tension. And if you think about human beings, what makes mammals so special is the opposable thumb, because the opposable thumb allows us with our index finger to create tension, which allows us to use tools, which allows us to do everything else that we do.
That.
So if you don't have tension, you can't have anything else.
No, that's so good. That's amazing. I actually haven't heard of that before.
Isn't that cool?
That's fascinating.
Yeah, Andy Stanley on that one. I wish I could say I made that up.
Yeah. Have you heard of the book How We Got to Now?
No.
Oh, you would love it. It's great. It's how 6 innovations that shaped the modern world, but it's using similar ideas of like one key integral part that massively shapes society at large. And so it's interesting the breakthroughs that brings. But let's just stick on tension a little bit, because I love this. I mean, it is our mantra: intention in the tension.
Yeah.
And having intention in that tension is our role in life in a lot of ways, and it's daily. So what is one of, or the greatest tension that you're living in currently? Like, what's the tension on the front of your mind in daily life for you in this season?
I think the biggest one is probably how to spend my time. And I feel constantly in tension around whether it's in friendships and relationships, wanting to invest in so many people all at once. It's tensions around, because I've lived a lot of different places, I have community in a lot of different places, and wanting to both invest and grow in communities that are, in places like New York, where I've lived previously, but then also to be present here and really invest deeply here. That's a tension. That wherever I am, I'm missing someone. That's a tension that I've had to just accept, that, I'm never going to be able to live in the same place as all the people I love. It's a really hard one to embrace. Yeah. And tension of building a business and everything needing time and everything needing energy poured into it. And knowing how to spread that out and what things to to wait on or defer on, and how to prioritize. So yeah, a lot of tensions.
So many, right? And like, I think the more conscious we are, the more we find them everywhere. Which is like, it's like a double-edged sword. It's like,
all the
Damien,
time.
why don't you just go away?
Exactly. And then just realizing that it's like those tensions, back to the instrument quote, it's like those are what allow us to play.
Yeah.
You know, if the strings on a guitar don't have tension, you have no music. And so I feel tension everywhere in my life. And I embrace that, because that's what, you know, that stretching, even though it's not always comfortable, it allows the best sound.
And I think it's why one of the things I always say is like, there's a tension, but it's a beautiful tension, and life is a beautiful dance. And a dance is something that has a lot of tension in it, right? There's usually multiple people moving, and it's going to an external sound, and there's space that you're taking up, and you're trying to create a movement around that. And there's a lot of tension there, but it's so beautiful to experience it. And when it's done well, and that's life, you know, it's like, it's amazing. It's this beautiful dance, which is such a beautiful tension. And, speaking of dancing, I hear you're into 90s R&B. Is that true?
Was that Kristen who said that? That's amazing. I think I went to a 90s R&B bar with her once. That's incredible. Who isn't?
Yeah, seriously. So, I mean, we could talk forever, but unfortunately, we don't have forever here. So
it's a tension.
That is a tension. So
if we make an 8-hour podcast, no one will listen to it. It's a tension.
So let's touch on your career path, because you have lived in many places. You have done many things. Give me the 30,000 foot view of college to today, and then we'll hone in on a few pieces of that. Sure.
So spent my most of my 20s working in anti-trafficking, human trafficking. Had the privilege of being the first employee of what became a really significant organization in the anti-slavery space, and was just a wild ride to get to be a part of helping to build a social movement. When I started working on the issue, no one really knew what modern slavery was. And I was like the friend you didn't want to bring to a cocktail party, because I'd shut down every conversation when somebody asked me like, hey, what do you do? And I'd say, work on slavery. And they'd say, oh, honey, we dealt with that in the 1800s. It's not a thing anymore. So it was just a really incredible ride, though, to get to be a part of building that social movement and working in that organization. And was a partner for a while in an impact investment fund, and worked with a firm in New York to deal with supply chains and transparency tied into, again, preventing trafficking and human rights abuses. And then from there, I went to Oxford and did an MBA over there. Initially had wanted to do an MBA and study business, because being for so long in the nonprofit space, I saw a lot of nonprofits struggle to find sustainability because they didn't run like a business. And there was this sense of, well, if I'm doing something good, then that ought to be self-justifying and we'll be okay. And so because I felt like there needed to be a better business acumen there, I decided to go to business school, or said it. I actually had it as a dream for a long time. And then, around the time when I was writing the book, I was thinking about life regrets that I had, which is so funny, sitting around thinking about like, what do I regret in life? And I was just reflecting. I was like, I regret that I never went to business school, because that had been a dream. And at the time I was like, I'm like 29. I'm like, what? Then if that's my biggest life regret, then what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, I got to just go. And so I turned around an application in like, I don't know, a month or something, like took whatever tests I needed to take, and would just kind of applied on a whim. And, so not the traditional, thought out 2 years in advance kind of thing, like really smart people do. But yeah, it was a really, really incredible, very formative experience to do that. And, and then I did that while I published the book while I was there, which I don't recommend.
Yeah.
They told me at Oxford that nobody had ever done that before. And I was like, oh, really? That's strange. And then I learned why, because it's, I'd be like, have final exams and be sending out edits at 7 a.m. and then have final exam at like 9 a.m. on private equity. It was just like kind of anyway, this is a challenge for sure, leading to the burnout. But yeah, and then took some space and time and led me to start a company. So that's very quick.
No, that is a good job.
30,000
is tough. It's a tough level to get to. Yeah, no, that's great. I want to talk about, so in that, there's so much that you did, right? And I guess the first question is, what did you want to be when you grew up as a kid?
President of the United States.
Amazing. And when did that dream change?
Who said it changed?
Oh, dun, dun, dun. Plot twist.
I'm just kidding. No, I did. As fun as politics looks right now, I think I'm good. Yeah, no, you know what? I think I asked my mom as a little kid what's the biggest job in the world? Like, what's the, where can one make the biggest impact? And she said, being president of the United States. And I was like, great, done.
Yeah.
Sign sold. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think I've always kind of had this drive towards, I want to make life is so short. And I've just always had this drive I really want to make the biggest, most significant impact that I can, which is part of why I love writing, because I love that it lives beyond you and you can share something with someone in perpetuity, that you don't have to be there, that something can affect someone's life, that you can create something that blesses somebody is so mind-blowing and cool to me. But yeah, so I think the drive was towards what could make the biggest impact.
And in the journey after college, what was how did you think about the next step, wherever you were at in that career path, right? In those 10 years or whatever it's been, was there ever a time where you knew beyond the next step of where you wanted to go?
Yeah, when I was, 22, I created a 20-year life plan and I've just executed against it.
Just like a robot.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Classic 3 right there.
I'm just kidding. No, I never did that. I have no idea. No idea. It's very much a joke. No, I hadn't had any plan to go into the nonprofit space at all. When I was 21, the founder of that organization spoke at my at my college, and there was a documentary film made on the organization and on anti-trafficking, and I found out the director needed some help, and so I was literally like made them a website and was packaging DVDs and shipping them off, like literally packing boxes in my living room. And just so funny because there was no big plan. It was just, this was a cause that I cared about and I wanted to help and I wanted to be a part of it. And I think they just saw how much work I was doing and they were like, what are you doing after you graduate? And I was like, I have no plan. I don't know. And they said, well, why don't you come work for us? And I was like, great, sounds good. It's the only job offer I have. So let's do it. So it was very organic in that sense. And I think a lot of times we put so much pressure on ourselves to like have a formulaic plan instead of really letting your passions lead and running at them and trusting the process to evolve as it's meant to. When you are doing things you love that serve the world, there's naturally going to be good that comes out of that, whether that impacts your career or just, is a place for you to derive joy and meaning in your life. I think it's so important. And I think so many people are focused too much on, I need that dream job. And for me, it was like, I want to be a part of this.
Yes, being a part of the journey. And that's also like what that book I brought up, he really highlights that point, how we got to now. He highlights the point that there's always 2 or 3 quantum leaps needed to get to where the innovation needs to be, right? It's never one big leap. It's usually a few smaller leaps that get us to where we need to go. And I think the same is true like in any career path or in any journey in life is it's not necessarily about knowing what 10 steps down the road is. It's about knowing what's your next step and how can you make that step well.
Yeah.
And how can you be faithful to where you're at in that journey. And the end will take care of itself in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My mom says, do the next right thing.
Very sound advice. That's awesome. I will say, though, on the one point you made, I love that you're highlighting the letting the passions lead. But in that, there's also a tension, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not passion, and having passion be the thing that drives us isn't necessarily sustainable or isn't necessarily the whole picture. How do you think about the tension within letting your passions lead, but also doing things that you don't necessarily want to do in light of that passion?
Oh,
or even
yeah.
that, even the tension within
Absolutely.
that thought. What is that? Flesh that out a little bit for us.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to be packing boxes. It was just what needed to be done, and so it's not to say that you're always going to enjoy exactly what you're doing, but it's going to be oriented towards something that you care about or believe in. I'm also just a big believer in being wise and still paying the bills. I think that there's kind of this push to just go out and pursue a passion at forsaking all else. Actually, Adam Grant writes about this really well in his book Originals, which he talks about. We kind of think there's this myth that the startup founders that succeed are the ones that just go all in and both feet first. And he had the chance to invest in Warby Parker because they were a couple of his students. And he told them no, because they all had day jobs. And he's like, this is a passion, or this is, something you guys are obviously pouring a lot into, but you're hedging. And so I'm not going to bet on you. And he would have been a bajillionaire if he had done that at the time. And so out of that regret, he wrote the book Originals, where he studied and realized that the people that made the biggest innovations actually had steady income. Even like T.S. Eliot worked at a publishing house till he was 50 as a writer. And so I think it's really important if you are driven into creative passions, finding stability that can be something where you still have meaningful contribution, but you're not always depending on your art or your passion to pay your bills.
Huge, yeah. So stability and sustainability.
I know. There's such sexy words, aren't they?
They are. Oh, man. We just love it.
Yeah.
It's like
dependability
tagline.
is my other new favorite one.
Oh, man. That's rich. So, I guess the next place I'd love to hear from is on current business. What is the business, and what led to you starting a business, and what is your goal for this business?
Yeah. So we haven't launched yet. So we are technically in stealth mode. So I can say a little bit,
Yes.
but I can't say a ton.
For sure.
But the company is called Copper, and we are building a platform for book clubs. So to connect people in community and meaningful community, and to use books as really the gathering point to bring people together. So it's really funny. I didn't anticipate becoming a tech CEO. It's not where I saw my journey going, but it's really kind of become the natural right next thing. And I actually started out with a vision of really wanting to improve the publishing space. I saw a lot of authors be frustrated by the process. And in that time that I took a sabbatical after grad school, one of my professors from Oxford, her name is Rachel Botsman. She's a phenomenal thinker, writer on the collaborative economy and on the role trust plays in society. And she reached out to me a couple times and said, I really think you should do something in the publishing space. I think this industry needs to be disrupted, and I think you can do it. And just kept giving me that little nudge. And only because I was taking the time and space to have that sabbatical, it was like a light bulb moment out in the country in England, and was like, oh my gosh, I was like, no, kind of like shrugged it off, and then had that kind of light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, I do need to do this. She's right. And but I think entrepreneurship is so much around problem solving and continually holding things loosely and and continuing to kind of drive into what is the core problem that you're solving and how do you do that, and are you doing it in the best way possible? So I initially incorporated thinking I was going to start a publishing house to make all these innovations that I wanted to see. And the further I got in it, I realized that that even if I was really successful in it, I wasn't really going to transform the space. And it would be like a drop in the ocean, so to speak. And I came back to, well, what is it that I'm trying to solve for authors? And I realized that what makes it so hard to publish a book right now is the shameless self-promotion you have to do. And I'm sure you know the joy that feels like.
I'm very aware.
But it's you pour your heart and soul into something that's meant to be of service, and then you turn around and have to kind of hawk it on the street corner. And it feels incongruent or like out of integrity usually with the why and why you did it, and when you write a book to serve people. And so it really came from me saying, what could I build to serve authors and publishers and create a platform that served and improved the space. And Malcolm Gladwell writes about network effect in his book, The Tipping Point, that had always stuck with me, about how these books going viral out of nowhere was because they would go from one to many to many to many. And that's network effect. And so I got to thinking, how can I create network effect for authors and do it in a way so that they don't have to travel nonstop on a book tour speaking in front of a, half empty room of 14 people in order to sell copies of their book. There's got to be a better way. And it can't be the Amazon for the end user, for readers. It can't be that Amazon is the only way to discover books. There's got to be, a more community driven approach. And that backed me into, it's so funny. So I set out to solve those issues in publishing and for authors. And in the process, also realized that we have this, as a society, have a huge loneliness crisis right now, where half of Americans are lonely. And the UK appointed a minister of loneliness in 2016. So that's becoming its own health issue, where we're relying on social media to really replace in-person real life community. And we're just not designed for it. And our mental, emotional, physical health is suffering as a result. They now say being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is just insane.
Wow.
So that just doubled me down into, how do I create community and serve authors and publishers in the process? And that's through book clubs. So the plan is we'll hopefully launch in about 6 to 8 months. So stay tuned. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's a lot of the why.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. And it's so fun because, again, I think if we shift our perspective to say, it's not about this breakthrough idea that we hang on to with a closed hand. It's about having this breakthrough idea lead us to the next breakthrough idea, which keeps innovating as we iterate it through what's needed to actually, because you never know the core need until you start really working to try and find it and working to try and define it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And having a lot of smart, wise people speak into it. I've had people say, like, this is such a great idea. How did you come up with it? And I'm like, I really didn't. I just started moving towards a problem that I saw, and then kept adjusting what I was building in order to better serve those needs, and allowed people a lot wiser and more experienced than me to speak into it and shape it.
I think that's something we can all do wherever we're at in life. Like, this is something I love doing too with any ideas that I'm kind of sitting on or stewing on, is just giving it as much air as possible. Yeah. Talk to as many strangers, friends, acquaintances, anyone. Like, if it's something you believe in, there's two positive things that come. They could either refine it by giving you good feedback or advice or affirmation, or two, they take it and actually bring it to the world for you. And both of those are good things, because we can't do everything.
Right.
So be open-handed with it. You know, and I did a photo shoot this last week and just literally met these two people, and met them that morning. And we ended up having some good conversations. It led to me sharing like this big vision I've been having and getting to share, If they take it wrong with it, amazing. If they help me take it wrong with it, amazing. If nothing happens, at least I got to, flesh it out a little bit more with new people. So I think we all have the power to do that, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I want to touch, before we end with a few one-offs, I want to touch on human trafficking and what your time in working in that space, I guess the big question is, what is the state of affairs in today's, I guess we can focus, I don't know if you want to focus more on American or the world, but whichever one you feel strongest about, what is the state of affairs today, and how has it changed over the last 10 years even?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I became so passionate about publishing was I saw books ignite the anti-trafficking movement. So back in those early days, 2007, 2008, where nobody knew about this issue, around that time, a few years before, and then through that time, there were a handful of books that were published on modern day slavery, all in quick succession. And I watched the, greatest, whether it be, funders who would read the books and pump hundreds of millions of dollars into the space, to politicians, celebrities, thought leaders, activists, soccer moms, like high school kids, you name it. People would read these books and genuinely become informed and then go out and do something and be activated to engage in some way. And that's what really created a bigger social movement around the topic. And so that is where a lot of my passion for the space derives from, because I see the power of the written word to move the needle on some of the biggest, kind of most pressing issues of our time. But as far as the current state of affairs goes, it looks like the number's gone up because the reporting's gotten better. So today they estimate around 46 million people in slavery. When I was working on the issue, the estimate was at 27 million. But again, that's just because the reporting's gotten better. I have been so encouraged, not only to see just the mass awareness that's happened, how many people have gotten engaged in supporting anti-trafficking organizations, but also what many people don't realize is they hear the word human trafficking and they think sex trafficking, but more than 80% of all trafficking is in the labor industry and in the supply chains that touch our lives every day. And so I think the consumer awareness that's growing around really thinking through where our products are made and who's making them. The sweater I'm wearing, like the cotton in it was grown somewhere and somebody picked that cotton. And if it was picked in Uzbekistan, it was probably from child laborers. And so beginning to connect those dots. I remember in 2009, 2010, we had built a website called Free to Work where we analyzed, we were analyzing companies and their supply chain transparency. And I just remember somebody, I think it was a donor, saying to us, companies are never going to care about this issue. This is truly a lost cause. You are never going to be able to make a difference on this. And I just left lunch today with a friend who's built a company called Freedom, FRDM. His name's Justin Dillon, and his company maps the supply chains and the risk profiles of major corporations. And his clients include Target and Boeing and SAP and Virgin, and to see companies like that coming on board and caring about their supply chain, and legislators caring about it and passing laws like the California Supply Chain Transparency Act was passed a couple of years ago, which requires companies doing revenue over 100 million doing business in California to disclose their supply chain practices of monitoring and transparency. Those have significant change and impact. So I've been so encouraged on the corporate side, and then just to see the innovative models coming out. Like I did, I had the privilege of working with the Freedom Fund out of London and New York for about 6 months before I went to grad school, and to see how they do this hotspot model where they engage all these local actors they'll work with a dozen to 20 different local community-based organizations, legislators, law enforcement, the local government, like everything to actually eradicate slavery. And they'll be able to eradicate to liberate an entire village in India. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. So seeing these very, very innovative, high impact approaches being done gives me I think because I've seen how far we've come in just 10 years, I have an enormous sense of optimism and hope. And if you look back through history, we are actively in what could be called the fourth abolition movement. And to see history happening and being written it's a pretty big wow.
That is. What do you see as the biggest need at its core? Like I guess if we had to strip away all the layers, what is the core need, or what is the core component that is at the root, I guess, of, and it's hard for something this big, but in your understanding of this space and what's going on, what do you see is at the core?
I mean, I think the challenge of it is that there isn't like a linchpin in it, because it really does sit at the intersection of so many other social issues, from, poverty being at the very, very core of it, I guess. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the reason people are exploited is economic, and people are vulnerable to that because they don't have jobs. And if there are no job opportunities, then people are vulnerable to being taken advantage of, exploited, trafficked, enslaved. And so creating economic opportunity for vulnerable communities is probably at the very root of it, because you personally are not vulnerable to trafficking because you have a job and are, generate income and can sustain yourself. And that's not the case for many people in the world. And that's why so many people are vulnerable to it, specifically women and children. So I think that would be at the heart of it. And then I think, as far as just, what we can do about it, I think not only having an awareness, but like truly caring where, caring who, mind the mica that's going in your eyeshadow or the chocolate in the dessert you just ate. I think as consumers, we usually just don't care. And if we don't care, it allows bad actors to act with impunity. And I think that's on us. It's, it's when good people do nothing and don't ask questions, to kind of bring it full circle on our interview.
Yeah, 100%. And like the pushback is always like, we can't care about everything. But I think the more important pushback even on that is, the more you care, the less you'll, obsessively consume. Because we consume way more than we need on all fronts, whether it be information, whether it be actual goods, tangible goods, whether it be food. I mean, like, you name it, we are just consuming always. Yeah. And caring actually helps us curb our consumerism, which is a good thing that we need too, just even personally, Yeah. So it works in your favor, not in your detriment. And that goes back to intentionality too.
Yeah. And I think just a general curiosity and an awareness of it, as far as like, if you see someone that looks like they can't walk away, asking questions and I mean, truly taking this interview full circle, it's being curious and being aware.
Speaking of being curious, I'm curious, what is the next book in your heart?
I've got a couple, actually. I'll tell you, one is actually a fiction book.
Amazing.
Which is really fun. Really, really fun. That one is like pure passion project. So that one's still a few years out, but it actually takes place in Oxford.
Wow.
And it's a really cool. The whole book takes place within a 2-hour class, and the whole storyline happens through flashbacks.
That's amazing. Are you in process already?
Yeah, I have some of it written. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. And then I have a few other that would probably come out sooner that are nonfiction books that I'm toying with. One I wanted to do on wonder. But I have a few other concepts.
Yeah. I love it. Me as well. So.
Oh, and one on being in our 30s.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So kind of a follow-up on the 22 principle.
That's funny. It's actually very similar to like how I've been thinking about next book, because mine was the quarter life perspective. So kind of like 25.
That. Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about like the first 30 years as my next subtitle.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. A few one-offs and we'll be done here. What is... Ooh, this is a good one. What is a belief? Well, actually, yeah, let's go here. What's a belief you formerly held that you no longer believe to be true?
That the world is black and white. That's actually the message that I would want to write in that 30s book is I think when I was in high school and my teens, I really had all the answers. Like things were pretty black and white and very clear. And I think the older you get, the journey of life is learning how to embrace the gray and the uncertainty and the tensions. And instead of pursuing having all the answers, learning how to ask really good questions and being okay to sit with the discomfort of not being able to resolve it all.
I love that. What do you wish you knew more about?
Ooh, in general? Coding.
Yes. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It might be fitting with the current season of life.
Maybe. I mean, you never know. You never know.
That's awesome. What is your guilty pleasure?
I mean, I'm going to say coffee because I always feel like I always have these existential moments of like, I should just not drink coffee. That'll be so incredible. And then I'm like, but why? It's so wonderful and brings me so much joy every morning.
Much joy.
I know. So I would say coffee because I just love it. And red wine and popcorn.
Yeah, those are all great.
They're just all. It's just.
I would throw dark chocolate in there too.
Oh, dark chocolate, 100%. That's not guilty. That one's not guilty. That's just good.
Pure joy.
That's just good. It's just joy.
Unadulterated joy.
Yeah.
What are your cornerstone habits?
Cornerstone habits. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and even like trying to develop a good morning routine. One of the ways that I've always kind of fought against routines. So one of the ways I'm reframing it is thinking about rituals. But I think, gosh, I mean, there's so many, hydrating every morning when I first wake up, being in community. Gosh, I don't know. I've cornerstone habits. What are yours?
So mine are definitely bookends. So like having bookends for the day, morning and evening, like bookends. So always starting and ending my day in the Bible and God's Word. Starting with some other, like having those in place. Other ones are checking in usually once a week on like a weekly vision time or journal time. Like priming for prioritizing presence with people. Consistently committing to time for reading, like outside extracurricular reading. So those are, I think those are just, I mean, exercise is like a non-negotiable for me, and sleep is a non-negotiable. So those are some of the cornerstones for me. Yeah.
Those are great. Yeah. See, I like yours better. I'm like hydrating. No, I think community staying priority is a big one. Sleep, consistent exercise, consistently being in places and consuming content that really inspires me and challenges me to grow.
Yeah. What would you say, this was just interesting to me, what would you say is your favorite form of community?
Sitting around a table with like a small group of people going deep on meaningful subject matter, usually with a glass of wine.
That is epic.
Yeah.
Yes. It's
Or
so
whiskey.
good. Yeah, there we go. Nice. What's your favorite whiskey?
Oh, I actually like bourbon.
Nice.
Yeah. Gosh, what's my favorite is, I like Lefroy whiskey. Have you had that?
I haven't.
Oh, it's really good. It's very peaty.
Nice. I'm a big rye guy. I like rye a lot. Yeah, I'm a little bit more, something a little bit more bitter, honestly. Just a little bit, like Campari. Have you ever heard Campari?
Oh, I love
love
Campari.
Yeah. Campari is one of the things you either really love or you really hate. Like there's nothing in between there.
Negroni is like my
best.
go-to.
Oh, and Campari soda is really nice too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so 3 more. What books have had the biggest impact on you personally?
Man's Search for Meaning. That was actually my subtitle. I added meaning in there because of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
I think that should just be required reading for life. So that's a big one. A recent one has been The Art of Gathering, which I highly recommend, by Priya Parker, which is really just helping inform the way that I think about the company. And it's sweet. Our team has been going through it like as our own book club. So we did a book club meet on it this morning, which was really wonderful. And there's so many areas of life that it applies to and how you think about bringing people together. So that would be another big one.
Yeah, those are amazing. I'm gonna have to check that out. If you were to give a TED Talk, what would you speak on?
I've actually wondered this. I really have. I don't know. I don't know because it's a fun one to think about. But because I actually wouldn't give a TED Talk until I felt like I had like one zinger that I wanted everyone to hear. So at the moment, I would say Journey is the Destination because that's what 22 was about. But when someday I do give my TED Talk, I want it to be on kind of the next big idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know yet.
Life will unfold it, right?
Yeah.
Which is exciting.
It's fun to dream about, though.
Totally. And you're totally right. Like it really, something like the format of TED, which is just the most refined form of a keynote, is it has to be some core truth that is just so in your bones. That's the only way it leaves an impact, you know?
Yeah, I think it would, I don't know what the title would be, but I think it would be around community.
Yeah.
And how we need one another and how we're hardwired for relying on each other and existing with one another. And I think the temptation of technology is to make us more self-sufficient and independent. And while both of those are great, it's a lie to believe that we actually don't need each other.
Man, it's so true. Yes and amen.
Oh, and comparison culture. That one definitely needs to be that down with comparison culture,
which is defeated largely by community in person.
Completely, and vulnerable, authentic community, like, where you see, gosh, if I'm like the difference of seeing someone's Instagram and then catching up with them and everything looks perfect and polished, and then you talk to them in person, and
even like the negative side of anything social is like, are you really going to say that nasty comment when they're standing right in front of you in your face?
Gosh,
no, like you're going to actually see them as a human being.
Totally.
And it's not that you're not only going to say it, you're not even going to think it really, because you're like, oh, this is a human just like me. And they have feelings and thoughts and desires and beliefs just like me.
Totally.
Whoa.
Totally. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. It's bringing humanity back. So I think it would be somewhere in there.
Bring humanity back.
Yeah.
That's good. No, that's really good. Okay, last question.
Okay.
If you could send a morning text reminder to every up-and-comer out there, what would you say and why? They get this text message from you every morning.
I would say live like you're loved. Because I think if you know that you're loved unconditionally, you can go out and do anything and take any risk. Because your worth and your value is not in your achievements or failures, and whatever comes of those, they're all gonna take you further in your journey. But the fact that you are loved is unchanging. and you can't earn it.
Praise God for that, man. Well, Allie, where is the best place for people to find you and connect with you and see what you're up to?
Instagram, my handle is Allie Bridge, Allie Bridge. I would say the same for Twitter, but my Twitter got hacked by a Russian bot, and I've not been able to get it back, so don't follow the Russian bot.
Wow.
I know. It's sad, right?
Real life.
I
Wow.
know. Struggles.
Crazy.
That's okay. One less social media is fine for me at the moment.
So true. Well, and everyone listening, you can find the full show notes with links to everything at theupandcomershow.com/episodes/Allie, Allie.
The one and only. There can't be another Allie now.
No, there can't. Or we could go Alibaba if we really want.
Yeah! Mama Mai would love that.
We'll stick with Allie. But thank you so much for this time. This has been a treat, and so many good things to think on and be reminded of. So this has been a treat.
Thank you for having me.
And for everyone listening, we hope you have an up and coming week.